Imagine waking up to find an entire family has vanished, not just disappeared, but fled in terror, abandoning their lives without a trace. No ransom notes, no enemies, just a house left in eerie disarray. The front door was left wide open. Car keys, wallets, and passports were scattered on the kitchen counter. The family computer was still on, as if someone had been interrupted mid-task. This wasn't a staged disappearance. This was panic. This isn't fiction. This is the baffling case of the Tromp family, a seemingly ordinary, hard-working Australian family who, in August 2016, abandoned their comfortable lives in a frenzied rush, convinced they were being hunted. Their sudden flight into the wilderness left investigators questioning. What could make an entire family lose their grip on reality? On that quiet August morning, the Tromp family home stood as a silent witness to something deeply unsettling. Neighbors, accustomed to the usual rhythms of the rural community, were the first to notice something was amiss. The white Peugeot that was normally parked in the driveway was conspicuously absent, yet the house itself seemed frozen in a moment of abrupt departure. Curtains fluttered slightly in the breeze through an open window, and the front door, though closed, didn't quite latch properly, as if someone had left in too much of a hurry to secure it behind them. Inside, the home told a story of sudden, frantic abandonment. Jacoba Tromp's purse lay upturned near the kitchen entrance, its contents, lipstick, loose change, and crumpled receipts, scattered across the floor as though it had been dropped mid-step. The kitchen counter was cluttered with items that would normally never be left behind. Passports splayed open, credit cards fanned out beside them, and car keys resting near the fruit bowl, glinting in the morning light. It was as if the very concept of identity and security had been discarded in an instant. The living room added to the eerie tableau. The television hummed softly, still tuned to a morning news program, the glow of the screen flickering over a coffee table littered with half-empty mugs and a plate of uneaten toast. A blanket was draped haphazardly over the couch, one corner trailing onto the floor, as though someone had thrown it off in haste. But the most jarring detail was the security cameras, or rather, the absence of them. Just days before, Mark had meticulously installed them throughout the house, convinced of some unseen threat. Now, their remnants hung in twisted wires from the walls, the devices themselves torn down with such force that patches of plaster had cracked and splintered. The violence of their removal suggested not just paranoia, but a desperate, almost primal need to escape some imagined surveillance. The silence of the house was oppressive, broken only by the faint ticking of a clock and the occasional creak of settling floorboards. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of an intruder, just the unmistakable impression of a family who had fled their own home as though it were no longer safe. The unanswered questions hung heavy in the air. What had driven them out so abruptly? And why had they left behind the very things, money, identification, means of communication, that most people would grab in an emergency? The Tromp home, in its disordered stillness, seemed less like a crime scene and more like the aftermath of a shared nightmare. In the tight-knit community of Sylvan, the Tromp family had always been seen as the epitome of stability and success. Mark Tromp, at 51, was more than just a berry farmer. He was a shrewd businessman who had built his operation from the ground up, earning respect for his innovative growing techniques and fair dealings with local suppliers. His wife Jacoba, 53, was the heart of the family, known for her homemade jams and the way she could make anyone feel welcome in their home with just a warm smile and a cup of tea. Their children, Mitchell, the practical 25-year-old who helped manage the farm's logistics, Ella, the artistic 22-year-old who had just completed her degree in graphic design, and Rihanna, the responsible 29-year-old who worked in finance, were all thriving in their own ways, making the family's sudden disintegration all the more shocking to those who knew them. The first cracks in their normalcy appeared subtly. Mark, usually so level-headed, began checking and rechecking door locks, peering out windows with unusual intensity. He started making cryptic comments to Jacoba about being watched, dismissing her concerns with a nervous laugh when she pressed him. Then came the late-night whispers between the couple, overheard by the children, urgent conversations about safe routes and untraceable phones. At first, the siblings brushed it off as their father's usual stress about farm finances or some passing worry. But then the behavior escalated. Mark began compulsively scanning license plates of cars parked near their property, convinced they were being surveilled. He started insisting family members leave their phones in another room when talking, his hands trembling as he demonstrated how easily devices could be hacked. Jacoba, normally the voice of reason, found herself drawn into Mark's growing paranoia. She began noticing suspicious vans driving too slowly past their house, ordinary noises at night taking on sinister meaning. The children watched in disbelief as their mother, the woman who had always soothed their childhood fears, now nodded along to their father's theories, her eyes wide with new apprehension. One by one, the siblings found themselves infected by the same creeping dread. Ella started having trouble sleeping, jumping at shadows. Mitchell, usually so logical, began researching counter-surveillance techniques online. Rihanna, the most skeptical at first, found herself double-checking window locks before bed. What began as isolated moments of unease snowballed into a shared conviction. They were no longer safe in their own home. The family that had always faced challenges together now found themselves united in something far darker, a collective fear that would soon drive them to abandon everything they knew. The Tromp's descent into madness reached its breaking point in the early hours of August 29th, when the family piled into their white Peugeot with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The car's interior became a pressure cooker of paranoia as they sped toward Melbourne Airport, Mark's white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel mirroring the tension in the vehicle. Every passing car was a potential threat, every glance from a stranger a suspected surveillance operative. When they reached the airport, Mark's paranoia peaked. He became convinced security personnel were watching them specifically, that their names had been flagged on some invisible list. In a panic, he ushered his family back to the car, abandoning their hastily packed luggage at the curb. What followed was a harrowing odyssey through rural New South Wales that played out like a waking nightmare. The family became nocturnal creatures, driving under cover of darkness and parking in remote rest stops to catch fitful sleep in their cramped vehicle. They avoided toll roads and main highways, convinced these were monitored, instead navigating a labyrinth of back roads that twisted through sleepy towns and vast stretches of empty bushland. Meals consisted of gas station snacks eaten in silence, the wrappers accumulating at their feet like breadcrumbs, marking their increasingly erratic path. Mitchell, the normally patient eldest son, found his resolve crumbling with each passing hour. The final straw came when Mark insisted they ditch their phones in a river. At that moment, the young man realized with chilling clarity that this wasn't precaution, but psychosis. His parting words, "This is insane," hung in the air as he walked away, leaving his family to their shared delusion. The remaining Tromp's journey took an even darker turn when they arrived at Jenolan Caves. The ancient limestone formations, normally a tourist attraction, became a cathedral of their collective madness. The cave's famous echoing chambers amplified their whispers into ghostly reverberations, the constant drip of water sounding like footsteps following them through the darkness. Local Aboriginal stories about the caves being a place between worlds seemed to seep into their fractured psyches. When they emerged hours later, their eyes held a new kind of terror, as if they'd left something of themselves in those subterranean passages. By September 1st, the family unit shattered completely under the weight of their shared psychosis. Ella, her hands shaking uncontrollably, seized an opportunity when her parents were distracted and took the car keys. The drive to the police station was a blur of tears and fragmented thoughts, her mind struggling to reconcile the loving parents she knew with the paranoid strangers she'd fled from. Meanwhile, Rihanna's breakdown reached its crescendo near Goulburn. Convinced invisible pursuers were closing in, she abandoned the roadside and plunged into the bush, her clothes snagging on branches as she ran blindly through the wilderness. For 2 days she wandered in a dissociative state, her mind protecting itself by erasing all memory of her ordeal, until she was found curled in the back seat of a startled farmer's ute, her lips cracked from dehydration, her eyes staring blankly at nothing. The Tromp family's shared nightmare had finally run its course, leaving in its wake a trail of broken lives and unanswered questions. The investigation into the Tromp's disappearance unfolded like a detective story without a villain, leaving authorities grappling with a mystery that defied conventional explanations. Detectives meticulously retraced the family's erratic 1,000-kilometer journey from Sylvan to the Sunshine Coast, collecting security footage from gas stations, interviewing bewildered motel clerks, and examining the abandoned Plusieurs found near Jenolan Caves. Each piece of evidence only deepened the puzzle. The family had withdrawn no unusual sums of money, made no suspicious communications, and had no history of criminal involvement. Forensic accountants combed through their finances only to find healthy bank accounts and well-managed assets. The Tromp's computers and phones, when recovered, revealed nothing more sinister than grocery lists and farm business emails. Jacoba's discovery along the Prince's Highway presented a heartbreaking scene. The normally put-together matriarch was found barefoot, her clothes torn and caked with dirt, muttering incoherently about getting away. When paramedics approached, she recoiled as if expecting attack, her eyes darting nervously to the tree line. Mark's eventual emergence from the Maroochydore bushland completed the tragic picture. The once confident farmer stumbled into a roadside diner, his beard grown wild, his sunburned face twisted in confusion as he demanded to know if they were still out there. Police interviews with the family members revealed disturbing gaps in their memories, their accounts fragmenting like shards of a broken mirror. Mark recalled snippets of hiding from helicopters that were never there. Jacoba spoke of running from faceless pursuers, while the children described an overwhelming but inexplicable dread that had consumed them all. Psychiatrists who evaluated the family noted the textbook progression of shared psychotic disorder. What began as Mark's delusional beliefs had, through the family's close emotional bonds and isolation during their ordeal, spread like a psychological virus. The most chilling aspect for investigators wasn't what they found, but what they didn't. No surveillance operations, no financial motives, no evidence of substance abuse or prior mental health issues. The Tromps had simply broken, their shared reality crumbling under the weight of a collective psychosis that left even seasoned detectives unsettled. The case files would eventually close with more questions than answers, a haunting reminder of how fragile the human mind can be when fear becomes contagious. The psychiatric evaluation of the Tromp family revealed one of the most fascinating and disturbing phenomena in mental health: folie à plusieurs, or shared madness. This rare condition, sometimes called shared psychotic disorder, occurs when delusional beliefs transfer from a primary affected individual to others in their close circle. In the Tromp's case, Mark's escalating paranoia acted as the initial spark, his normally rational business mind gradually consumed by irrational fears that they were being surveilled and pursued. What made this situation particularly tragic was how seamlessly his delusions infected the entire family unit. Jacoba, as his life partner of decades, was the first to adopt his distorted worldview, her trust in her husband overriding her own perception of reality. The children, raised to respect their parents' judgment and bound by the intense emotional ties of family, found themselves gradually surrendering to the same terrifying fantasies despite their initial skepticism. The dynamics at play were textbook examples of how folie à plusieurs operates. The family's increasing isolation, both physically as they withdrew from normal activities and psychologically as they reinforced each other's fears, created an echo chamber where delusions flourished. Without external reality checks from friends or colleagues, their shared beliefs became their only truth. Psychiatrists noted how the stress of their sudden flight and constant movement exacerbated the condition, with sleep deprivation and poor nutrition further impairing their cognitive functions. The caves visit may have represented a tipping point, the natural acoustics creating auditory illusions that confirmed their persecution fears, while the Aboriginal legends about the site being a spiritual threshold may have resonated with their already fragile mental state. What began as one man's breakdown became a family's collective dissociation from reality, a chilling demonstration of how vulnerable the human mind can be to shared delusion, especially within the intense bonds of a loving family. The Tromp's eventual recovery came through separation and professional treatment, with each family member requiring different approaches to help them distinguish reality from the shared fantasy. Mark needed intensive therapy to address his primary delusional disorder, while Jacoba and the children required help understanding how their deep familial bonds had paradoxically contributed to their psychological unraveling. The case remains one of the most striking modern examples of how folie à plusieurs can transform an ordinary, close-knit family into participants in their own collective nightmare, demonstrating the powerful interplay between individual psychology and group dynamics in shaping our perception of reality. The Tromp family's eventual return to their sylvan home brought no neat resolution, only a haunting aftermath that continues to unsettle psychologists and laypeople alike. Though physically reunited, each member carried invisible scars from their shared ordeal, the kind that manifest in nervous glances at security cameras, hesitation before answering unknown callers, and an unspoken understanding that their family bond had been both their salvation and their undoing. Mark, once the proud patriarch, moved through the farm with a new wariness, his hands occasionally trembling as he checked door locks. Jacoba found herself compulsively organizing household items, as if maintaining control over her environment could prevent another psychological unraveling. The children, though outwardly readjusted, privately wondered how they could have so completely surrendered to what they now recognized as collective madness. This bizarre case leaves us grappling with profound questions about the fragility of the human mind. Was Mark's initial paranoia purely biological, some misfiring neuron that began the cascade, Or had he unconsciously picked up on some genuine but misinterpreted threat that set everything in motion? The terrifying ease with which Jacoba and then the children adopted his delusions speaks to the powerful psychological mechanisms that bind families together. The same trust and loyalty that normally provide security becoming, in this case, vectors for shared psychosis. Modern life's relentless stressors, financial pressures, information overload, societal instability, may create fertile ground for such breakdowns, particularly in tight-knit groups already predisposed to shared thinking patterns. The Jenolan Caves episode lingers as particularly unsettling. Did the family's exposure to local legends about the cave's mysterious properties act as a kind of psychological priming, making them more susceptible to irrational fears? Or was it simply that the cave's natural disorientation, the echoing chambers, the absolute darkness, the labyrinthine passages, became the perfect physical manifestation of their already fractured mental state? The Tromp story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about how environment, folklore, and human psychology can intersect to create perfect storms of shared delusion. Perhaps most disturbing is the realization that under the right combination of stress, isolation, and charismatic influence, any of us might be vulnerable to similar psychological contagion. The Tromp family's nightmare raises the chilling possibility that the line between sanity and madness isn't as firm as we'd like to believe, and that the very bonds we rely on for security could, under extraordinary circumstances, become the chains that bind us to collective delusion. Their experience stands as a sobering case study in how reality itself is a fragile consensus, maintained through constant checks and balances that, when removed, can send entire families spiraling into their own private nightmares. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more shocking true crime stories from around the world. Until next time, stay safe and stay vigilant. This is Crime Tales Across Times, signing off.